Welcome to the Never Too Early Fantasy Football Podcast, where it is never too early for fantasy football. My name is Jeff.
I'm Alex.
As always, thank you for downloading, listening, liking, and commenting on our podcast videos. Please join our community by subscribing to us on the socials. Our handle on all platforms is at N2E We are also available on all major podcasting apps by searching N2E Fantasy. Alex, what do we have on today's show?
On this episode of the Never Too Early Fantasy Football Podcast, we will be covering league news and we will break out our top 24 Dynasty rookie ranks. So Jeff and I will go side by side and do our rankings, and then we will bicker at each other and complain that the other one's completely wrong. We'll just argue over everything, and it's going to be a great show. So, housekeeping, we got 3 little news bites for you guys. Jeff, your favorite team for some reason, the Arizona Cardinals. Their longtime running back, David Johnson, has finally retired. And honestly, I don't know about you, I had no idea he was still in the league. You got some words for us about David Johnson?
Our dearly departed David Johnson, who was your favorite running back ever on the Texans, which we left out of this blurb. But I believe he was last a New Orleans Saint briefly, and he kind of retired because no one would sign him. And I think that's different than someone's calling it a career on their own terms. I feel like the NFL decided not to keep him in the league. So here we are. And it leads us to our next retirement of wide receiver Devontae Parker, who just signed with the Eagles this offseason. So he's going to retire. He wants to spend more time with his kids and his family. I can't blame him. He would have been a great third wide receiver on that offense, but that's not going to happen now. And that's just going to leave some more stats and some more pieces of the target pie for Dallas Goedert and Devonta Smith and such. So any words on Devontae Parker?
And he was a guy who I felt like every year people were talking about he's going to break out, and he hadn't really done much since he left the Dolphins. So I mean I went through phases where I definitely liked him, and it's weird to me that I feel like the Dolphins had Devontae Parker and Landry and I think Lamar Miller at the same time, and Tannehill. I want to say those guys overlapped, but they couldn't do anything. But it's a little weird that he signed with the Eagles and then all of a sudden retired. But if that's the decision for him, then good for him for making it.
You don't think that says anything about the Eagles team structure, do you?
No, I think he saw 6'12" Johnny Wilson over there, and he's like, I'm not going to beat this guy out. So he decided to retire.
Hey, then it becomes free money at that point.
Just referencing a rookie wide receiver that's still not in my top 24. So,
yeah, absolutely. But do you think there's any chance that he unretires? I know John Ross did that this week with. Was it with the Eagles?
I believe it was. John Ross has not been relevant for I feel like 10 years. So it doesn't matter to me.
I wasted a first-round rookie pick on John Ross, so I completely feel this, but he did sign with the Philadelphia Eagles, so it seems like he takes Devontae Parker's spot, but there's always a chance that Devontae Parker unretires in the future and signs with a different team if he has a different change of heart.
He could unretire for playoffs, honestly, if they needed him.
Weren't they talking about having J.J. Watt and potentially Aaron Donald unretiring for playoffs and playing playoffs? So this is something that I recently heard.
Yeah.
Kind of smart.
J.J. Watt would unretire and play for the Texans, and Aaron Donald obviously would play for the Rams again if they needed him.
Yeah. All it takes is the coach to ask them, but I think it's worth the ask. Like, the pass rush in the postseason is huge. Speaking of huge, what did your Texans do recently?
The Texans agreed to a 3-year contract extension with wide receiver 1, Nico Collins. I think that that is a really good move because they're trying to get ahead of the market. I think that if they waited a year, it was going to be more expensive. So I'm glad that they made the move now. I think that he's going to reward them this year and put up good numbers. I think Stephon Diggs is probably a 1-year rental. I don't see how that's gonna be a long-term deal. So it makes sense to lock up your number 1 wide receiver. That means he and Tank Dell are going to be playing together probably for the next 3 years. And with CJ Stroud, it's a really good core. So I'm excited as a Texans fan. Jeff, you have the numbers over there. What are the official numbers?
So I think the max value of this, and I've seen a few numbers quoted, is a 3-year, $75 million extension with Nico Collins, which will pay him as the number 7 wide receiver currently. But as you have mentioned to me offline, Jefferson, Chase, and Lamb are all up for extension very shortly. So this could all be changing, and he might be just a top 12 or top 10 paid wide receiver very shortly.
I think Ayuk and Higgins are also up there too. Like they're coming up as well.
Yeah. Do you think T. Higgins gets anything close to this deal?
We have definitely talked about this offline, that this could be the baseline that Higgins is going for, or maybe more than this. I don't necessarily think Higgins is worth this because I feel like where they're at today, Collins is the better receiver. But as you point out, Higgins has the better pedigree to this point. Obviously, Collins had a good year last year, and Higgins didn't quite have a good year last year. So for me, it's recency bias. But if Higgins gets money like this, I think we both agree it's not going to be at the Bengals and probably going to be somewhere else.
Totally agree, and it does sound like you are a what have you done for me lately type of guy here.
I just feel like things change year to year, and I think that past performances can help build a picture and can help temper your expectations, but I do think sometimes people are too slow to shift when things change.
I like to look at everything on a 3-year scale for the reason that that kind of gives us a little bit of recency and a little bit of what they've done long term. And I think that's always helped me looking back 3 years.
Okay, well, why don't we look 3 years in the future and make our top 24 dynasty picks? So let's go one by one. We'll start with one each. Like we'll go our number one spot each, and then we'll keep going all the way until we hit 24. And we'll try to give you guys the best players that you should be taking, the guys that you're going to want to have on your team for multiple years. Look into our crystal balls. So, Jeff, do you want me to go first, or do you want to go first?
I can kick it off. I'm assuming we have the same individual or the same 3 first individuals. So let me get kicked off here with number 1. It's
Probably.
the Arizona wide receiver, Marvin Harrison Jr. I think he has the best quarterback out of the 3 major weapons for this year and probably at least next year. So I do anticipate him to make a year 1 impact. And if he can get it together and figure his fanatics deal out and everything else that is a distraction around him, if he can get it all figured out and put together a heck of a Hall of Fame career, this will be well worth this number 1 overall pick. But I do have concerns about that, as we've mentioned offline.
I'm surprised after all your concerns, you still kept him at number 1.
Man, I wanted to move him down, but the other 2 have quarterback concerns, and I just can't do that.
I also have Marvin Harrison here, and I don't have the same level of concern that you do. Obviously, you want them to immediately smoothly transition with the team and be as pumped as possible and work as hard as he can, but he's just insanely talented, and I think they'll get it together. I actually have more concern with Kyler Murray being his quarterback than I have concern with the quarterbacks for the other 2 wide receivers, but to me, he goes in as the de facto number 1 right away, and I do think Kyler Murray's better than Daniel Jones, so I think he has the best situation overall. But number 2, we'll just go reverse order here. I have Malik Neighbors. I think he's insanely talented, and he, like Marvin Harrison Jr., are now the de facto number 1s for their team. Like I said, Daniel Jones is a downgrade to Kyler Murray, but I think that Neighbors is one of those receivers that's going to produce no matter who the quarterback is, and I think he's a top tier talent. So I really like him either way. Jeff, who do you have at number 2?
So at number 2, I also have Malik Neighbors, wide receiver for the Giants, and I agree with that. And I think some of the reason why I would pick him over Odunze, who, spoiler alert, I have at number 3, Chicago wide receiver Rome Odunze, is because the quarterback position and the depth chart concerns that I have. Obviously, I like Caleb Williams a little bit more than Daniel Jones, but I don't like Rome Odunze's depth chart just yet. He's still competing with DJ Moore and Keenan Allen this year, and then who knows what their contract situation will look like after this year. So could be some question marks around the depth chart.
Cole Kmet, let's not forget him. But I also have Odunze here. I agree with all the things that you said. I do think that Rome Odunze is a superior prospect talent as well. So I think eventually he will get the numbers that we expect from most top wide receivers. But like you said, it's crowded with Keenan Allen there. It's crowded with DJ Moore. They also have receiving running backs as well. Not ideal to get fantasy production year one, but he's definitely someone I want on my team. And if I have the third overall pick, I'm taking him regardless. So at number 4, I have, for me, it's Brock Bowers, the tight end for the Las Vegas Raiders. I think that generational gets thrown around a lot, but I truly think he's a generational talent at tight end. He's not the same kind of guy that Laporta is. Um, but he's a better version of Kyle Pitts. It's like if you put Kyle Pitts' athleticism mixed with George Kittle, I think that's what you have in Brock Bowers. And even though they took Myers last year at the tight end position, I think Bowers is someone who can be in two tight end sets and be played as a wide receiver and be played in the slot. He can be moved around in multiple positions. And they took him this high because they plan on using him. I really like him, and I take him at number 4, and I'd be comfortable doing that. Jeff, disagree? Agree? Who do you have here?
Yeah, this is our first difference here, and you're gonna look at me a little bit weird on this pick, but I'll break down Brock Bowers a little bit later in my draft here, but I completely agree with you. I think he's a generational tight end. I'm just worried what they're going to do at quarterback position for the foreseeable future. Like we know this year is O'Connell and Minshew. What happens after that, and is it a good fit, and is it a good quarterback, basically? And plus, it also raises the concerns that high Myers picked from the year before. So it's not fun looking at the target pie in Vegas right now, especially knowing who the two quarterbacks are entering the season. All right. So my number 4, ready? You better hold on to your seat here. Coming in at number 4, Keon Coleman, Buffalo wide receiver. He is putting in the work in the offseason, which is a huge green flag for me. He has the best quarterback out of all these next people that we're going to talk about, and he has the best availability of target pie that is out there. So basically, Keon Coleman could slot in and be an immediate presence, and he could also improve as the years go on. But I know you're thinking I'm a little bit crazy there, but I think you like me to be a little bit crazy on this.
Okay, sorry, I needed a second there. I'm a little shocked that you have him that high, to be honest with you. I thought I really liked him, but that is much higher than I think is warranted right now. I mean, next year, 2 years from now, we could be looking back and saying, why didn't anyone else have him this high? But this is such a talented class. I like Keon Coleman as a person, and I like him as a prospect, but you might be falling in the trap that you really like the spot that he's at, and the destination is influencing how high that you're putting him. Maybe that's a thing.
It's possible.
I wish I could have him this high, but
You wish you were
I
me,
don't.
Alex.
His his athleticism scores are not ideal, but they're good enough. I mean, we've seen other wide receivers perform who didn't have the top athleticism scores. In fact, sometimes it's counterproductive to have the absolute top athleticism scores. I think he could be good. I don't know if it will be necessarily this year, but supposedly Josh Allen told him that you're the wide receiver that I wanted. Secured him. He's a different kind of wide receiver than they've had. He could be very good. He's probably going to still be the number 1 or close to the number 1 from at day 1 for this team. Man, I was
It's always
not
nice to be
expecting this.
wanted.
All right, Jeff. Who is your number 5?
Coming in at number 5 is another wide receiver. So I went wide receiver heavy here at the top of my draft because I do think that they're going to have the biggest impact of any of the positions. And number 5 is going to be Brian Thomas, wide receiver, Jacksonville. I think he's playing with the second best quarterback with the second best opportunity for targets. And I do foresee him really taking over maybe even the wide receiver one as early as this year.
I like Brian Thomas Jr. I think he already does the same kind of routes that they were using Ridley for. I don't think he's that polished yet, but I think he's a very good wide receiver and he's very athletic. And I jokingly liken him to potentially a Julio Jones type, but he's not quite there. I think
I'll
he could
trade
be
him
really
to you.
good. I just think it'll be. I just think he'll be more of a next year breakout than this year, but I think he'll get usage this year. My number five's different. I have Lad McConkey at number five out of the Chargers. I think he is the automatic day one wide receiver one for them, and I think for someone who has a vested interest in Justin Herbert underperforming this year, I think Lad McConkey would be a reason why Justin Herbert would perform highly this year. I think he will eventually be a good replacement for Keenan Allen, but he'll be a very solid start year one. I like him a lot, and this is probably the perfect landing spot for him, in my opinion.
I really don't hate it, to be honest, and it's bold. You might have to eat crow on Justin Herbert this year with Lad over here. But I keep hearing you say that he's the number one option on this team, and I feel like you're mispronouncing Quentin Johnston somehow with Lad McConkey. I just don't understand it, but here we are. And didn't they use a much higher pick on Quentin Johnston than Lad McConkey?
Different GM. That GM was fired, so that tells you everything you need to know.
All right, who do you got at 6?
I have Adonai Mitchell for the Indianapolis Colts. I really liked him going through the process and going through the draft stuff, and I thought he should have gone around earlier than he did. I think the Colts got a steal. I think he and Michael Pittman will be an amazing duo, probably one of the top duos in the league. And I think you add in Josh Downs to that mix, and I think they have just about as good, a little bit worse, but just about as good as the Texans trio. So I think it'll be interesting watching these teams play each other for the foreseeable future, especially since both their quarterbacks were taken in the same draft last year too. So I really like it, and I think that Anthony Richardson's going to have a big year, and I think he's going to prove you wrong, Jeffrey. But I like Adnan Mitchell a lot.
Yeah, that's a bold move. I think that's quite high on him, but yeah, I we'll get to him a little bit later in my ranks.
I think with Lad McConkey and Adnan Mitchell, I think there's a lot of other places that have them much lower. I think Lad McConkey is probably towards the end of the first round, and Adnan Mitchell is probably towards the top of the second round. Is where most of the time they're going, but that's where I value them, and that's why I've made some trades out of the middle of the first round and collecting a lot of picks around like 10 through 14. I really like that range because I'm going to get those guys, and I like them more than guys getting taken in front of them. But Jeff, you can go ahead.
Yes, you seem like you're doing what I did with Keon Coleman there. Just if he's your guy, go ahead and take him. Like, worst you could do is be wrong, but if you're right and you didn't grab him, then you're going to be kicking yourself. So my number 6 is another wide receiver, and that is Xavier Worthy, Kansas City. And I believe that he also plays with a great quarterback, but his opportunity in year 1 is not going to be as high as year 2. So he might take a year to marinate a little bit, but I do anticipate him becoming one of Patrick Mahomes' favorite weapons and potentially his new toy. Like, he had Tyreek Hill, so this will be potentially his new toy going forward. What do you think about that?
I think it's interesting that we have we have two different Texas wide receivers here. I have Adonai and you have Worthy.
Yeah, and I see Adnine and I see Worthy as number 3 options on their teams as far as wide receivers go. And I would rather put my money and my chips into the bag of Patrick Mahomes than I would Anthony Richardson there.
See, I think Adonai is the number 2 option on his team. I think Worthy is the number 3. I think Worthy is more of a gimmicky player. He's a speedy, fast guy that is not going to do well through contact. I think Adonai Mitchell's a more well-rounded wide receiver. I think obviously he needs polish, but I think to me he's a better prospect than Worthy. But Worthy was drafted in the first round. Chiefs traded up for him, so you have that going for you. But outside of Rice, the Chiefs have a pretty poor pedigree over the last few years taking wide receivers. So I don't know. But
Yeah, well,
Worthy's not someone that I wanted this high, so it benefits me.
absolutely. And I think Keon Coleman's not someone that you want this high, so I think that I won't end up with a ton of Xavier Worthy anyways, because of how I have them ranked. All right. So since I'm doing the odds first, my number 7 is tight end, Las Vegas, Brock Bowers, and he got bumped down a little bit. I'll be very honest because of his landing spot, and I just don't know what exactly they're going to do in this position in Vegas here. So, what do you think about where I have Brock Bowers?
I mean, that's fair. I feel like between where I had him at 4, like 4 should be the highest, and I
Mhm.
think 7 should be the lowest. So that's fine. I like him there. Is Brian Thomas Jr. your number 4 or
5.
your number 5?
Yeah, for Keon Coleman.
Okay. I have Brian Thomas Jr. here at 7. I think him, Adnan Mitchell, and Lad McConkey, to me, they're kind of the same tier. So you can flip and take whichever one you prefer out of that group, but I think they belong pretty close together, in my opinion. I like Brian Thomas Jr. I don't like that he's on the Jaguars. It's either it's going to work out really, really well, or it's going to be a disappointing landing spot. I'm not sure which one yet, but I think that at a minimum, he can do a similar stat line eventually as what Ridley did this past year, but he has the athleticism to do better. I still really like him, and this is where I see him as at his 4, in my opinion.
Right. No, I don't hate it. I understand why you picked the other players. Adonai Mitchell is my only question mark that I have for you, but I could see where Anthony Richardson likes him with the deep ball, but I do think that does hurt Michael Pittman this year.
We'll see. All right, I'm going first with evens. So this is where I start my running back range. And number
Ooh.
8, for me, personal preference, but my 8 and 9 are pretty similar. My 8, I have Trey Benson, the Arizona running back. I like him more than the other running backs, personally, but I think this as soon as this year he could take over for this team that could potentially be a playoff team that has Kyler Murray, that has Marvin Harrison Jr., and I think that they could be very competitive, and he could be the goal line back. I know that they have James Conner and Michael Carter already. Michael Carter, I don't see that being there much longer, and James Conner is an aged vet, and I think that he could be replaced this year. So I really like it. I think it's he's the best running back prospect this year.
All right. So that was your number 8. So that leaves me at my number 8. And this is where I'm going to go quarterback, which might shock you a little bit, but I'm going to go out on a limb and take Jaden Daniels here at the 8th spot. I like what he can do. I like his rushing ability. I think he's a quarterback that could change your team. So that's kind of why I'm going with him here. Could see you taking him a couple of spots lower, but this is where I'm comfortable taking the first quarterback off the roster, off the list here onto my roster.
Oh, I can see why you'd want him there because I mean, his last year with LSU, he threw 4,000 yards and ran for 1,000 yards, and that would be highly valuable in fantasy. My only
Mhm.
issue is the way that he runs. I feel like he's going to get completely decked and he's going to break his spine or get severely hurt. So I would be worried about that on the downside. And Washington previously took a skinny rushing quarterback in the first round, and that was RG3, and now we call him RG knee, and he's out of the league. So I am not sure how this is going to go. But that's sky high upside, but really scary floor, in my opinion.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So that is number 8. Number 9 is your boy, Lad McConkey. I do have him as a first round pick. He's just a little bit later on my list, but he does make the first round, which should make you smile and make you realize that we're on the same page a little bit here.
All right. So I'm glad that he's at least that high. I know some people have him lower than that still. So kudos to you. My number 9 is another running back, and that's Jonathan Brooks with Carolina. He's starting the year coming off an injury, and he probably will eventually win over the starting job. And we don't know how good that offensive line is yet. We don't know how good Canales is as a head coach yet, but it is very promising for Jonathan Brooks. Those are some of the reasons why I didn't have him over Trey Benson, but to me, they're in the same tier, and I can absolutely understand people wanting to take Jonathan Brooks as their first running back off the board. It makes sense to me. I just prefer Benson. Jeff, how do you feel about Jonathan Brooks here?
I love Jonathan Brooks. I love the pick. I love what it's going to do for Bryce Young. I love everything about the pick. And I do agree in fantasy dynasty, he is a first round pick for dynasty purposes, but you're a little bit higher than him than I am, which kind of is concerning considering this is my team. So
part of that is this isn't as good of a running back draft as last year. So to me, these are the more for sure running backs. So I feel like you want to take them here because for me, the next few wide receivers can be grouped together. So I'm more concerned about getting the better running backs at this point.
sounds good. All right. So whenever you are ready here, I believe that is 9 picks apiece, and now we are entering double digits. And your number 10 is Alex.
So this is where I have my quarterbacks going. So at number 10, I have Caleb Williams from Chicago.
We
I think
differ.
I think he's a better fantasy quarterback than he is a real quarterback. I think he's coming into a really good situation, and I think this is a fair spot for him, especially for people who play in reality sports online and take him in the first round and want that fifth year option. So I can understand that. Um, I don't have that much to say about him. This is just the soonest that I would feel comfortable taking a quarterback this year. Jeff, who do you have at 10? And what do you think of the Caleb Williams pick here?
We're not too far off on Caleb Williams. I was just surprised that you went for the thrower over the rusher, and we'll see if that pans out in the long run. But going into my number 10 here and my number 11, they're my first 2 running backs off the board, and it's Trey Benson at 10 and Jonathan Brooks at 11. So same order that you had them in, just 2 spots, both of them lower than you, but both first round picks. I do believe that the best running backs in every draft class, there should at least be a handful of them picked in the first round because that's the hardest position to actually nail in Dynasty.
I don't hate it. I like that you have them in the same order that I have them, and I like them. I like that you have them relatively close where I have those guys. My number 11 is another quarterback, and that is Jaden Daniels, who you had a little bit earlier than this. So I have Caleb Williams at my 10 and Jaden Daniels at 11. So I think that you can group them together. Jeff, how do you feel about Jaden Daniels at this spot?
Well, he's definitely a first round pick this year because I do think that either Caleb Williams or Jaden Daniels could lock down a quarterback spot for multiple years to come on your dynasty team. So it would be something to get a peace of mind, and those two I believe will be around in 4 years for a extension. So we'll see if that's true, but that's what I believe.
Okay. So I will start here with 12, and then you'll do your 12, and then we can just quickly recap each of our round ones just so everyone knows them in order. I actually have Keon Coleman here at 12. I like him as the first round. I like him as the first round wide receiver. Not quite ready to go on the limb that you went for him, but I would still take him over a lot of wide receivers in a very heavy wide receiver group. I like him for all the same reasons that you did. Jeff, how do you feel about him at 12? I know obviously it's lower than you have him, but how do you feel about that?
So it looks like I have consensus pulled up here in the background. Just so everyone knows, I did my list without looking at consensus, and that's how I did my list. But I was kind of looking at it here just to kind of see if we would get any of these players that we're listing and where we're listing them. And he's actually 1 spot ahead of yours, so I don't know if you would ever end up with any shares of Keon Coleman at this point. So that's one thing to consider there. But Ladd McConkey is ahead of Keon Coleman on that list.
All right, who do you have at 12?
At number 12, I have Caleb Williams, who you just listed at number 10. So, yeah, we're pretty close on that, but I do believe that he's a first-round pick. I did teeter-totter back and forth on making him a first-round pick or not, just considering that most Dynasty leagues do have that fifth-year option on the rookies, or they can have that option on the rookies. That really made me teeter-totter back and forth because I do consider this as an actual Dynasty draft format, like who's available and who I would take, regardless of team.
All right, so we'll each recap our own first rounds, just so you guys have all of mine 1 through 12, all of Jeff's 1 through 12. So it's easier. And then Jeff, I'll let you get kickstarted in the second round. So number 1 through 3 for me: Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, Rome Odunze. I think they belong in the same tier, and you can make a case for any of them in whichever order you want. Number 4, Brock Bowers kind of has a tier of his own, the best tight end for me this year and probably like the last decade, maybe. The next 3 for me are also in the same or similar tier, and that's Lad McConkey at 5, Aiden Mitchell at 6, Brian Thomas Jr. at 7. You can make a case to switch those around per your preference. That's just how I have them. The next group for me in the tier of their own is Trey Benson and Jonathan Brooks. I believe they kind of belong right next to each other. Trey Benson at 8, Jonathan Brooks at 9. You can make a case either way. Then I have Caleb Williams and Jaden Daniels at 10 and 11. Also, you can make a case whichever your preference is. And then Keon Coleman at 12. So, Jeff, what was your full first round? And then go ahead and get kickstarted at the second round.
All right. So I went 1, Harrison Jr., 2, Neighbors, 3, Odunze, 4, Coleman, 5, Thomas, 6, Worthy, 7, Bowers, 8, Daniels, 9, McConkey, 10, Benson, 11, Brooks, and 12, Caleb Williams. And I know you mentioned tiers a little bit before, and I kind of take the similar approach. However, like, let's say I'm drafting for a team where I have 7 receivers and like 3 running backs. I might jump up those running backs 1 or 2 slots, 3 or maybe even as high as 3 or 4 slots, just to try to get my hands on one of them to try to even out my team a little bit. I know take best player available is great, but if I can't start 7 or 8 wide receivers and I'm drafting an 8th wide receiver to start, like, is it really going to be helping me? Of course, it could be trade bait and everything like that. There's a lot of things to take into consideration here. But if my team today needs a running back, I might bump those running backs up a few slots. Same thing with the quarterbacks and the tight end. Like, if I have no tight end on my roster, I would be okay with taking Brock Bauer at 4. So no problem at all. All right. So let's hop into the second round. And this is where we're going to have much more differences because we only had one difference in the first round where you had Edi Mitchell and I had Xavier Worthy. That was our only difference in round 1. Round 2, I expect
only different player. Only different player entirely. Different orders. Yeah.
I mean, there's not going to be a ton of situations where you have more than 1 or 2 picks in the first round of drafts, unless you're a few of our league mates that like to hoard all the first round picks. But share the wealth out there for us first rounders and loving the draft here. Oh, number 13. This one was really hard for me because there isn't really a spot for him right now. But I do believe after this year, he is going to be at the worst, the number 2 wide receiver for the team. And that's Ricky Pearsall, wide receiver for San Francisco, number 13.
I have Xavier Worthy out of Kansas City here. I don't like him as a first round, but I'll take him in the second round. I'll feel more comfortable about that. But I do have Ricky Pearsall at 14. So for me, I like Ricky a lot. But with Debo and Ayuk both there with San Francisco, it's hard to see him have that much of an early role, especially with how much they like to run the ball with McCaffrey. If one of those guys gets moved, I will be much happier about Ricky. But I won't take him in the first round, most likely, barring some kind of change last minute. But I really like him. We're only one spot off from each other there. Jeff, I'm curious how you feel about Xavier Worthy being at 13 for me, and who do you have at 14?
So I think that's a little bit low on him, but if you really don't like the player, I mean, you're really not going to get any shares of him that low. So you're basically saying that you don't want the player this year or as part of your draft class, unless you had the first 13 picks of the draft. Then stop hoarding all the picks.
I mean, I have him where I value him, and that's 13th. Yeah. So I think that's a fair value for him. And if he's gone before then, I'm going to end up with a player that I like more than him. So I'm happy with that result.
Correct. Yeah, I was just stating the obvious that you probably will end up with minimal to 0 shares of Xavier Worthy with that rank. Just given everything that I'm seeing out there, I'll probably end up with 0 shares of him because I'll probably end up with more shares of Keon Coleman in this exact instance of this draft because of where I have him. So
I'm very curious because we have one of our first rookie drafts this week, Jeff has the 7th pick. I'm very curious who he will take between Worthy and Keon Coleman. I'm very
Oh, it'll be
curious how that
Coleman 10
shakes
out of
out.
10.
Okay.
I mean, you don't have to wait for that one. I'll spoil it for you right now. He's 2 spots ahead. I would take him 100 times out of 100 times. Wouldn't even think about it.
All right.
Be a lot of fun too to
Okay.
own, to see where he goes too. But I might actually have a shot at him. I mean, I don't really see any of my other guys, my top guys, being available there. But we'll see. We'll see.
There's
But
there's a 0% chance that somebody would take him before you take him at 7, I think.
all right. I mean,
So
I'll
I think
take
you have a
it.
good shot.
That's a
That's kind
great
of
wide
disappointing
receiver
because
to
that
add to
means
the
I
course.
probably won't get him. I probably won't get him in any league that we're in together.
Nope. Does that disappoint you a little bit?
It does, because I wanted him at least one league, and it doesn't look like that's going to be an option.
He's my number 4.
I just can't take him that high. I just can't do it.
I know, but you don't. I don't think you have very many picks ahead of me this year. So
No,
that's the
in
other
fact, I
issue.
had the pick right in front of you, and I traded down.
You could have had him. You gave him up. But
Who do you have at
we'll see
14?
if someone else has the guts to do it. Because if they do, I probably would pivot to Lad at that point, and that would drive you absolutely batty.
It would. It would.
Because in that particular league, like I don't need Jaden Daniel, who is my number 8. I'm looking in a different direction at quarterback this year, so I'd probably
Well,
skip over the quarterback
to
position.
be honest with you, I traded down from 6. I believe I picked up the 10th overall and like the second pick of the second round to do that.
Yep.
For me, it's very likely Lad McConkey, Adonai Mitchell make it that far. Probably not Brian Thomas. I think at least one of the running backs between Trey Benson and Jonathan Brooks make it. Probably Trey Benson because most people prefer Jonathan Brooks. So at 10, I'll get guys that I liked much higher. Like I would have taken at 6. I'll get them at 10. And I also have the 11th pick as well. So I'll get 2 of those guys. So I feel pretty good about that. And
Yeah.
then I could even get Adonai Mitchell at the second pick in the second round too. So 3 people that I probably would have heavily considered at the spot in front of you, I will probably end up with, which I feel pretty good about. But I digress. Jeff, you have who is your 14?
I'll let you move up to 8th for 10th and 11th.
No, thank you.
You know the person that giraffes at number 9 listens to this podcast.
I don't care. I'm expecting people to take at least one quarterback. I'm expecting someone to take Xavier Worthy. So
Yep.
I'm happy with probably anyone that falls there, honestly.
That's true. All right, so that was your 14th was Ricky Pearsall. Is that correct?
Yes.
So my 14th is running back for the Rams, Blake Corum. I do believe that he could take some significant snaps, maybe not this year, but in year 2 from Kyron Williams. So I know there's a lot of Kyron Williams truthers out there, but he's injured right now, and Blake Corum's being asked to fill in for the role that Kyron Williams would have. So it does seem like they are getting him ready to take the spot, whether it's this year or next year. So we'll see what happens. But I'm not a big. I'm much more down on Kyron Williams right now than I was probably a month and a half ago. So, any thoughts before I jump over to number 15?
No, I have Corum coming up shortly, so I'll talk more about him there. But go ahead with your 15.
So number 15 is going to be Xavier Leggett, Carolina wide receiver. So finally, my wide receiver goes off the board, first round wide receiver. I don't know if I anticipate him being a year 1 guy, but I do anticipate with Thielen and Deontay Johnson's contracts expiring for someone like him to be able to shoot up the depth chart for year 2. So second round pick for that reason, and I would be more than happy to get him because that would be representing my team.
All right. I think that's a fair range for both him and Blake Corum. But I have Marshawn Lloyd here, running back out of Green Bay, and I like him this year as my number 3 running back in this rookie class. And I think that there's a good chance that he supplants Josh Jacobs in the near future because I think Josh Jacobs is inefficient. I think his contract isn't that imposing. And I think that Marshawn Lloyd reminds the Packers a lot of Aaron Jones, who they just let go to Minnesota. So I think Marshawn Lloyd his time is coming soon, just like you think Blake Corum is looming over Kyron Williams' shoulder. I think the same thing could be said for Marshawn Lloyd. And speaking of Blake Corum, I have him at my number 16 pick, so pretty close to you, just 2 spots away. So Jeff, how do you feel about Marshawn Lloyd here and Blake Corum here?
That is very high for Marshawn Lloyd. I don't believe Josh Jacobs is moved off of in Green Bay anytime soon. So you'll always be competing with that. He's 26 years old right now, Josh Jacobs, so he's probably got 2 to 3 good years left. And he signed a 4-year, $48 million deal this year. So we'll see what ends up happening with that deal. But that is a bold call. How much of that is guaranteed? What's that?
How much of that is guaranteed? How much of that contract is guaranteed?
12 and a half.
So it's 1 year.
Yep. But cap next year would be $9 million. So they could get out of it next year.
Green Bay has been very good about having 2 running backs getting used. So I think he'll absolutely be used this year. And I think next year he could supplant Josh Jacobs, if not sooner. So that's just how I feel about him. I liked Marshawn Lloyd a lot, and I think he went to a really good landing spot. Yes, he has a big name in front of him, but I wouldn't be too intimidated by Josh Jacobs.
I would be, only for the reason that Josh Jacobs is still only 26, and he is a former rushing champion in the league, and that's not something that you could scoff over just because he had a down year last year. We all know that you like to only look at the last year.
Hasn't he only had one elite year in his career so far?
He's had only had one rushing years.
Good, like one phenomenal year. The rest of it is kind of lackluster.
Right, but it was enough to move off of Aaron Jones, who knew the system. It's not like they needed the cash because they have a cheap quarterback, 4 cheap wide receivers. It's not like they were hurting for money. It's that they decided to actually bring in this guy. So I think that he just turned 26 years old too. So we'll see what happens there. But I would be baffled if this goes the way that you think it does. In his 5-year career,
but who do you have at 16?
Yards. He's averaging 1,100 yards a season rushing.
Okay, but one of that's from a 1,600-yard season. That's influencing all the other seasons. So don't even give me that, man.
Correct, but he has 3 1,000-yard seasons, and you know that there's only like 8 running backs that get that a year. It's not very many, and he has 2 double-digit touchdown seasons.
I think Josh Jacobs is vastly overrated, and
I don't. He's got his receiving ability.
We'll see. We'll see how that goes in Green Bay.
I think he's a complete back, so I think that is going to be the hard thing, is getting Lloyd onto the field.
Well, I'll tell you this. I'll have 0 shares of Josh Jacobs across all of my leagues.
Wow. That's a little bit of a shocker.
I would rather have Aaron Jones with Minnesota with
what?
Freaking Darnold as their quarterback than I would have Josh Jacobs. I think Aaron Jones, to me, is a better running back still than Josh Jacobs. And it makes no sense that they parted with him for Josh Jacobs.
Well, Jones has exactly 0 RB1 seasons. Like, number 1 overall. And Josh Jacobs doesn't either, but he has a 3rd. So, and he's only
Josh Jacobs had no competition. Aaron Jones had guys breathing down his neck because they insisted on having a 2-back system. Where the Vegas didn't.
AJ Dillon.
Vegas didn't ever. So we'll see, man. But who do you have at 16?
I think it's going to be hard to get Lloyd onto the field. Right now, Josh Jacobs is my number 7 running back going into this year. So we are on, you said number 16?
Mm-hmm.
You'll be happy to hear this one. Number 16, Jermaine Burton, Cincinnati wide receiver. He's one of your boys. And I might be able to poach him on you.
Another guy I'm shocked that you have higher than me.
Yep. Hey, you must not really want him.
I do want him, but I try to be pretty meticulous about how I value players. And I mean, if I had the pick, I would be tempted. I would be tempted to jump to Jermaine Burton over other guys, even though I have other guys ranked ahead of him. It just depends on my roster construction. But yes, I really like him, and he's someone who could continue to rise. I'm still shocked that you have him this high. I mean, you love
I'm a
Higgins, so
shocking
I don't
guy.
know why you think Jermaine Burton.
I just think anyone playing with Burrow has a shot, and I don't think Higgins is on the roster after this year. So that's my reasoning behind that. All right, so we can hop over to number 17. And this one is going to be a bit of controversy here, and because I haven't heard him from you yet, and I'm a little bit higher than consensus on this, but I'm gonna go Jalen Polk here. So number 17.
Interesting. That's a little bit higher than I am on him. I think there's a bunch of New England wide receivers that are similar talent level that we don't know which one's going to emerge first, but they did spend a second round pick on him, and I think that that's pretty telling, especially it's the new regime. So he ideally should be the first guy up to have the chance with his new quarterback, but I actually have his quarterback here at this spot at 17. I have Drake May as my third quarterback in the top 24. So if I get Drake May, I would be interested in getting potentially Polk or his fellow receiver Javon Baker, maybe. I get that stack. But I like Drake May. I don't know if this year is going to be that great for him, but I like him for the long stretch and for dynasty value.
Nice.
How do you feel
No,
about Drake
I
May here?
May's going to be coming up on my list, so I'm not crazy about it because this quarterback class has me a little bit worried. I don't know if he's going to play much in year one. I do worry that New England is more conservative and goes with Jacoby Brissett year one, but we'll see.
So for me, my number 18 is Xavier Legette. You already had him a couple spots earlier. I think that he's going to have to get eased into this team, but I think he'll eventually be the number one. And I think that he is a better version of Jonathan Mingo. So I think that he has a legitimate chance to be pretty good with this squad, and especially if Canales makes that offense better and improves everything, and Bryce Young takes a step forward, the offensive line plays better. I think that the passing side of this offense can really pop this year and can continue to improve. So this is where I feel comfortable taking Xavier Legette, but I understand why you have him a couple picks earlier.
Absolutely, absolutely. No problem with taking him a little bit later. Um, but I'm still surprised he went before Jermaine Burton because I know how high you are on him. So, all right. So you need my number 18 then, and we're gonna go Jalen McMillan from Tampa Bay here at number 18. I just feel like his opportunity over the next 2 years could really pick up with Evans and Godwin aging. And, Dynasty is not just about 2024; it's about every year after 2024. And I see some great opportunity for him. And it looks like there's some consistency at quarterback with Baker Mayfield for the next few years. So, thoughts, sir, before I move over to number 19?
I'm so confused, Jeff, because you like Higgins more than I do, but you have Jermaine Burton higher than I have Jermaine Burton. And then you like Godwin more than I do, but you have his direct competitor higher than I do. And I supposedly liked McMillan more than you. So I don't know what's going on right now. I feel like this is a carnival funhouse. I don't know what to make of this at all, Jeff. I really don't. I like McMillan. He doesn't make my top 24. There's just so many
What?
wide receivers that are good this year. I can't squeeze him
Yeah,
in. And he is
it's gonna
someone I feel
be.
like probably he's going to be a year three wide receiver, that like year three breakout wide receiver. So I'm not expecting much from him this early.
Hey, you still
But
hold Jalen Tolbert on your roster, so he's going to be a year three breakout. So we all know that there's room for those.
I don't know if you heard, but Brandon Cook said Jalen Tolbert's going to break out this year. So
That's what I'm
I
saying.
I am probably going to hold on to him.
Because Brandon Cooks told you to.
I think Jalen Tolbert. I've seen so many good flashes from him, and I just think he just needs more target volume, and I think he'll show up. I think Cooks is on his last legs. Like he's deteriorating. Like he's still going to be productive, but he's not 1,000 yard wide receiver anymore. I think Brandon Cooks fades to the wide receiver three spot, and I think Tolbert has a very good chance to be the wide receiver two for Dallas. It's up to him. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see if he can put it together.
But
All right.
McMillan, man, I'm not ready for that yet. I have him as I think a third round pick here. So
Are you going to
I
take him in
actually
your
have.
top 36?
I have him in my top 36.
Okay. I didn't know if you wrote out a
So
top 36. I did not, just so we're clear.
I went up to 76.
You're an overachiever.
So
You're a perennial
at
overachiever.
number 19, yeah, no one would ever agree with you if they heard you say that. So I have Jermaine Burton at 19.
Okay.
That's where I value him, but I could see him rise up. And there's a couple second round picks that I have that I'm hoping that he's still there. I think that's higher than consensus in most cases. So I'm
You ain't getting him over
excited to
me there.
potentially snag.
Taking him
See,
3 slots
we'll
before
see,
you.
Jeff.
But my number
We'll see.
19, since you took over the odds on me here, the odds on favorite.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you'd already said I thought McMillan was your 19.
No, that's number 18. Drake May is my number
Oh,
19, quarterback of New England, but you had just mentioned him, so I will let you go ahead and you can kick us off with number 20.
I apologize for jumping you. I misunderstood the number we were on.
You beat me down.
Number 20 for me is Roman Wilson, the Pittsburgh wide receiver. I would have Roman Wilson several spots higher if Arthur Smith was not the offensive coordinator, but I really like him. I think he brings a dynamic to this team that they don't have because they really only had field stretchers and they didn't have a guy who could play in the slot well and play inside out. And I think Roman Wilson is that guy. I think I'm excited about him in general, so I'm hoping that we see good things from him. And he's only at spot 20 for me because of Arthur Smith, like I said. So I'm hoping for better things dynasty wise. Jeff, who do you have at 20?
So at number 20, I am going to go Malachi Corley, wide receiver, New York Jets. And I do believe in year 2, he will be the number 2 wide receiver for that team. So some of these are long-term picks, and this was one of my long-term picks.
Interesting. Another guy that I'm surprised you're higher on than me. Especially since I thought you don't like the Jets at all. I thought you think they're a joke franchise and all this stuff.
They are, but they actually have a quarterback that could last more than 5 plays. They'll be in decent shape. You know I'm a huge Brees Hall fan. Huge. Bigger than big. Like, I would make him RB1 if there wasn't a Christian McCaffrey in the league right now.
Well, I
You
mean,
knew
that's
that
something.
last year though.
I like Malachi Corley. I'm still surprised that you have him higher than me, but I have him coming up soonish, so I'll talk about him there. But who do you have at 21?
21, I'm going to go Adnan Mitchell, Indianapolis wide receiver. So that's where I got Adnan right there. I do agree that he could be a great deep threat for Anthony Richardson. So that's kind of why you won me over with that one. And yeah, I might have to move him more up my board, but that's where I got him right now because I don't believe he overtakes Josh Downs, who actually had a productive year. What?
This is completely disrespectful. I can't believe you have Adonai Mitchell at 21.
Yeah.
Are you joking?
You'll see. You'll see. He's just going to be a deep
Even
ball
if he
guy
has
with
a face
Richardson.
planting year one, his talent is worth at least top of the second round. At least.
I'll move him up the list if you want me to. But I won't end up with
I
any
don't
shares of him.
want you to do it you think I want you to. I want you to do it because he's good.
Is this a Jedi mind trick?
No. I want you to want to do the dishes, okay? Why would I want to do the dishes?
So best that Adnan Mitchell is going right now, according to Fantasy Pros expert rankings, is highest is 11 and worst is 29. So at the bottom, I'm towards the bottom of that, but you're above the top of that. Which I do urge everyone when they do their rankings to kind of look at the rankings of Fantasy Pros and stuff like that because you can kind of plot and pick where you're going to pick players. If I had Coleman ranked number 4, but he's not even a first rounder anywhere, like why would I take him in the first round? Why wouldn't I try to acquire that first pick in the second round to grab him? Like just some chess matchups there.
I agree. And that's similarly how I plan to do it. All right. My 21 is Jalen Bright, running back out of Miami. I think that he is the Raheem Mostert replacement, and it's not going to be necessarily this season. But I think it'll be by next season, or they can roll out with all three of them, Mostert and Achan and Wright. I think they're trying to set up to no matter who's out there, if someone's hurt, they still have the same kind of running back who can run their system. So it is super, super fast. But I can't justify having Jalen Wright higher than 21. So I know I think there's places out there that do have him higher, but this is where I feel about him. I don't feel super comfortable considering that's a very crowded backfield, and Achan's already pretty electric. Mostert finished as a top what 6, top 10 running back last year, top
He was number
2.
2.
Oh, all right. Well, so it's really hard for me to put Jalen Wright higher. If you went to a different team, he would be higher than this. So, Jeff, how do you feel about Jalen Wright here?
He wasn't even in consideration for my list because they had just taken Achan last year. They have Mostert, and are always in the market for a running back. It feels like they were talked about with Derrick Henry the last 2 years. So I just don't trust anything they do at running back, to be honest. I trust their 2 top wide receivers and nothing else with that team.
Interesting. Okay. Well, number 22 for me is Malachi Corley, who you had a couple picks earlier. So I really like him. I don't know how soon he's going to be relevant, and I don't know if Rodgers plays the whole year. I don't know if they shift to run heavy approach. I don't know how it shakes out, but I like him. He kind of reminds me of um, Trey Flowers light from last year. I think he's very similar to Flowers, but I don't think he's quite as electric as him. So he's kind of like halfway between him and like a Randall Cobb type. So we'll see how that plays out. But the Jets really, really liked him. Just like Cincinnati, the entire room lit up when they were able to get Jermaine Burton. I think Malachi Corley, the Jets tried trading up for him like 4 times and were finally able to get him. So they were thrilled to get him in the 3rd round. And I would be happy to come away from the draft with Malachi Corley on my team.
We'll see if you get him. If we're in the same league drafting, you will not be getting him.
I have more picks than you, buddy. You got to really pick and choose your players.
I will strategically too now. All right, so that was your 22. So my 22 is quarterback, Minnesota, J.J. McCarthy. And I do believe that he's playing with the best wide receiver ever and probably the second best wide receiver ever and a really great tight end. I think he's entering a better fantasy situation than Caleb Williams is. I just don't think he's as polished as Caleb Williams is.
Agree. J.J. McCarthy there's a decent upside to him, but he's really, really young. He's not very polished. And there's a chance that he could max out as a game manager, which to me isn't great. So I have him just outside my top 24. I'm not that far off from you. I just don't have him at 22. So, and I actually have him. I think I have him at 26, but I have Bo Nix at 25. So I like Bo Nix better, in my opinion.
No, I think he's being overhyped right now. There's always one player that's overhyped in the preseason. And I think that's going to be the one player that is, and people are going to latch onto him. So
it's going to be really funny when Darnold plays 2/3 of the season at a minimum. It's going to be interesting.
Yeah, it'll be interesting when Nix stinks and they have to go to Zach Wilson. So it could happen.
I think that they got Wilson and Nix are kind of similar, but Nix is a superior quarterback in my opinion.
We'll see.
But who do you have at 23?
Sean Payton. I know Sean Payton is waving the pom poms for him. So if Sean Payton's doing it, people are listening. So all right. So moving on to 23 for me is Ray Davis, running back, Buffalo. And I know you're gonna hate this pick because you like Frank Gore Jr. a little bit better, but Ray Davis gives the Buffalo Bills something that they don't have otherwise, and he's going to give a grounder to this offense. And they actually drafted him.
I mean, it's not terrible. I just can't justify him being that high. There's other running backs in a similar situation, and I just think the wide receiver value is better in this draft class. I can see why you went that direction. I think part of the reason why I like Frank Gore Jr. is the fact that the cost to get him is significantly better. So he's way further down the list, but he has almost the same amount of chance catching on with the team and being the number 2 running back to James Cook and providing that thumper role. He could also be someone where he could be the backup to both of them. Like you could have, if Ray Davis carves out a serious role as a thumper, Frank Gore Jr. could back up him and James Cook, and if one of them's hurt, he can fill in that role, and he's just the cheaper option. But Ray Davis has the draft capital associated with him, and Frank Gore Jr. was an undrafted free agent. So I think it's fair to point that out. But Frank Gore Jr. to me is the one I'd prefer to own, but neither of them are in my top 24.
Okay. So I'll let you break down your 23 and give us your last pick too.
So I'll just do a 23 and 24 at the same time. With the same team. So I have Jalen Polk and Javon Baker as my 23 and 24 with New England. I think that there's a decent chance these are the number 1 and number 2 wide receivers on this team. Obviously, Demario Douglas is someone who could potentially be a threat. They still have Juju Smith-Schuster. I don't really care about him. These guys were brought in for a reason, and Jalen Polk is a little bit more polished, but I think he has more limited upside. I can't see him being a true number 1 at the end of the day. Javon Baker is someone who does have the potential to be a number 1 at some point, but he came with a lot of off-the-field issues, and apparently his dad wants to be more involved than Caleb Williams' dad and LeVar Ball, if you know anything about basketball. That's not something an organization wants to deal with. So Javon Baker went lower than his talent level would indicate. So I like both of those guys as a decent dart throw at this point. But to me, they're more valuable than any other running back that you could take. That's just how I view it. Jeff, how do you feel about these two guys here, and who do you have wrapping up the second round for you?
So I feel okay about it. I just don't know what they're going to do with Jacoby Brissett and rookie Drake May in year 1. And they have Demario also, who I loved last year. So just I don't really know how this depth chart is going to shake out. Also, New England hasn't been a breeding ground for wide receivers. So, and they also brought back Kendrick Bourne, who I love, and I know that you love because you picked him up after he tore his ACL last year. So he's coming back from that. But yeah, so I mean, I do think there's more competition on the step chart than we do give them credit for, but they should be able to get through it in relatively in short order. So we'll see what happens. I just don't know how much of the stat pie they're going to have this year. They also have Antonio Gibson catching balls, and so we'll see. They have a stacked wide receiver room with Kendrick Bourne and Jalen Rager and Thornton and Beauty and Baker and Polk and Smith-Schuster. They have a packed room right now, so they're going to have some serious cuts here when it comes to wide receiver cut time.
Yeah, they have a lot of 2s, 3s, and 4s, in my opinion, but no true alpha and no really, really, really bad wide receiver either. So they're pretty good there. But
so basically, do you think they're going to go into next year and they're going to go find their number 1?
it depends. If one of these guys breaks out and really looks legitimate, they don't need to. But if it's a lackluster performance from their wide receiver group, they'll absolutely look to go out and get someone new. As far as I was just going to say, there are still a lot of guys that I like that are still on my board outside the top 24. So, I mean, this is a good year to have a third round pick if you have the space on your rosters. There's a lot of guys out here that we didn't mention. So, this is a very fun draft, and I like this year's class better than last year outside of the running back position, which is kind of weak. But Jeff, do you want to quickly go over your second round selections, and I'll go over my second round selections just so everyone has them close together?
Absolutely. Are you going to let me go over my number 24 pick, or do you want me to do that during the...
Oh, wait. You haven't said it. This is why you talk. See, you just talk too much, and I forget that you need to make a pick.
All right, you ready for this?
I'm ready.
You ready for this? So this is where I wanted to take Audrey Estami from the Chargers. He's going to be my 25th pick, just for a spoiler alert. But number 24, I moved up Bub Means, New Orleans wide receiver, and I do believe that he's going to play opposite of Chris Olave this year. So I think that people aren't talking enough about him, and people aren't talking enough about the spot that Michael Thomas left behind open.
That's pretty high. I'm not really a fan of his.
I'm very high on him, but hey,
I think I have him now. There's some reordering I can do with my much later picks, but I currently have him at 59 on my rookie list. Um, I think A.T. Perry is going to compete for that wide receiver 2 spot, and I like him more at this point, and I liked him a lot last year. There are other guys that I like over above Means from the wide receiver position. One guy that's not in our top 24s is Troy Franklin, which I'm kind of surprised by. I like him a little bit more, and I'm not even a huge fan of his. And I like Luke McCaffrey a little bit. Not quite sure where to pinpoint him down. Brendan Rice, Malik Washington, Jacob Cowing, Johnny Wilson, Jamari Thrash. Those are just guys I like a little bit more than Bub Means at this point. So I probably will have 0 shares. Well, you won't have to compete with me.
I mean, this is a guy that I probably take with my last pick in the 3rd round, but he's worth a dart throw in my opinion here.
Okay. All right.
All right, go ahead.
Jeff, why don't you go over your 2nd round selections in order, and then I'll do mine, and we can close it out.
All right. So for the 2nd round, I started with wide receiver Pearsall, running back Corum, wide receiver Leggett, wide receiver Burton, wide receiver Polk, wide receiver McMillan, quarterback May, wide receiver Corley, wide receiver Mitchell, quarterback McCarthy, running back Davis, and wide receiver Means.
All right. So at 13 or 2.01, depending on how you perceive it, I have Xavier Worthy, wide receiver. I have Ricky Pearsall at 14, also wide receiver. To me, they're in the same cluster as Keon Coleman in the previous round. And then I have at 15, Marshawn Lloyd. At 16, Blake Corum. Both of them are running backs. I have at 17, Drake May, my 3rd quarterback. At 18, 19, and 20, I have Xavier Leggett, Jermaine Burton, Roman Wilson, all wide receivers. They're kind of grouped together, in my opinion. Then at 21, Jalen Wright, running back. And then I have at 22, 23, 24, Malachi Corley, Jalen Polk, Javon Baker, all wide receivers.
I know we're kind of wide receiver heavy, but that's okay.
That's how this draft has ended up. It's a lot of wide receivers. We both have 5 running backs. You had 4 quarterbacks. I had 3 quarterbacks. We both had 1 tight end, and then the rest were all wide receivers. So you had 14 wide receivers, and I had 15, right? I think that's right.
No, I think I went to 15 just before the
Who'd you take out?
switched. I took out Estime.
Okay,
He was
so you
24.
had 4 running backs?
Yep.
Okay.
I took him out, which I know is making you balk because you like Lloyd better than Estime, but I feel good things about him in the future.
I liked Lloyd as a prospect more, and he's also in a less cluttered situation, but he actually has a entrenched starter in front of him, whereas Estime, I don't feel like Javonte Williams is as entrenched as we would like him to be, and I think Estime has a chance to be the goal line guy, so that's going to be very interesting. I feel like his upside is very limited.
Yeah, and until
That's my
last
only
year of
issue.
Javonte's deal,
Yeah,
I don't see him re-signing in Denver.
yeah,
I think I
I
misspoke
agree.
earlier and I said the Chargers, but it's Denver. Wrong team. Right
Yes,
division.
you did say the Chargers.
Yep.
Don't worry, I was planning on editing it out. Hopefully I
I
remember
do
that when I
like
edit this.
I do like I mean the Chargers added it back. There's a bunch of other teams that have added backs, and we'll see what the depth chart shakes out to be. I mean Jonathan Brooks and Trey Benson, I'm not very scared of their depth chart past this year. Like they seem like the guys after this year. So, and that's kind of why we have them as our only 2 first-round running backs this year. Poor running backs.
Yep. Next year should put in quotes should theoretically be a better running back draft class, but we'll see how that shakes out. Okay.
Sounds
Well,
good.
Jeff, if we've got nothing to add here, we'll go ahead and wrap it up. Unless you have something.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have much else to add to this specific topic, but I was just looking at my spreadsheet of free agents, and one name came across on there that's kind of weird. There's a couple weird free agents still out there that we can talk about another time, but it's so weird to me that Cam Akers, running back, I know he's going through his second Achilles tendon tear, but it's so weird to me that he's 24 years old still. Like, and he's had 2 Achilles tears in that short period of time. So it stands out to me when there's a 24-year-old on the.
I was gonna say that blows. Like, honestly, that stinks that he's 24 and he's had. But I mean, 2 Achilles tears. You gotta feel like the career's probably over at this point.
Yeah, he's just 24 though. It's mind blowing because there's some running backs that don't come into the league until 24 or pretty close. So. Yeah, and it feels like Akers has been around forever.
Yeah, this is making me feel old, man. So I'm gonna wrap this up because it's I'm old and it's past my bedtime. So I'm gonna wrap this up now. All right. That does it for this episode of the Never Too Early Fantasy Football Podcast. Thank you all for downloading and listening to this episode. And please don't forget to like and subscribe. Please leave us a comment and share the show. Every little bit helps.
You can find us on all podcasting apps by searching N2E Fantasy with our handle at N2E Fantasy on all social media platforms. Please join our community and give us a follow. Until next time, take care of yourselves, and remember, it's truly never too early for fantasy football. Thank you again.
Bye, everybody.